Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of MAV20. My name's Helen Haralambis, and together with my colleague, Daniela Draskovic, the two MAV secondary education consultants, we will be your hosts today. So over to Daniela, who will now introduce our keynote for this morning.
Good morning, everyone. So our role will be to introduce presenters and sessions, answer any Q&A via the chat feature if needed, and provide any announcements. If you have any technical issues, please check your confirmation email for troubleshooting and who to contact for support. So let's begin. This is room 4, and our keynote presenter is Dr. Carly Sawatzki. Carly is interested in how young people become financially capable within families, communities, and schools. She is rapidly gaining national and international recognition for her ongoing research, which focuses on the design of financial mathematics tasks that reveal how young people think, feel, and respond to money-related problems. Through her work in the field, Carly has found that children's financial decisions can be influenced as much as social and cultural factors, values, expectations, emotions, and experiences with money as the formal curriculum. However, well-designed learning experiences that facilitate practice in rational, self-regulated financial problem-solving and decision-making seem to be impactful. Carly has published in prestigious international journals and led curriculum and research consultancies for Australian government agencies. She is regularly engaged by teacher associations, being recognised as a dynamic, thought-provoking presenter who challenges thinking, promotes critical conversation, and inspires innovation. Carly writes for The Conversation and EduResearch Matters and is regularly interviewed by ABC Radio. I would like to welcome Dr. Carly Sawatzki.
Welcome, everybody. It is great to have you here, and I thank you for your interest in this session. It's been quite the week in financial literacy education, with Victorian Education Minister James Merlino announcing that school banking programs will no longer be allowed in Victorian schools. So it's a great time to join us for this conversation, and I hope that some of what I have to offer today is thought-provoking to you in your own practice in mathematics classrooms. So I'd like to begin by asking you to reflect on your own work as financial literacy educators. Could you just make a brief note of key learning activities that develop financial capability at your school? I know that some of you will be primary educators and some of you will be secondary educators. Over the course of today, I'm going to be presenting grabs from each setting, but I'd like you to start by thinking about your own practice and what the role of mathematics is in those learning activities where you're intending to develop financial capability. Okay, keep those notes handy. Why begin there? Well, consecutive OECD PISA reports, which is a standardised assessment for 15-year-old students internationally, show that there's a strong correlation between mathematical and financial literacies, which means that there's something that we're doing in mathematics classrooms where students who are successful at mathematics are developing knowledge and skills and capabilities that are helping them to confront real-world problems in test settings. Now, that tells us something It doesn't necessarily tell us what happens when it's time to transfer those knowledge, skills, and capabilities into the real world in real life. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. A few years ago now, I initiated some research with secondary school commerce teachers. And one of the questions that we asked was what those teachers felt it was important to learn about money by the end of compulsory schooling. So around about that 16 years of age. It's a critical moment in time. It's not just around about the time that we're collecting OECD PISA data, but often young people are embarking on their first employment experience in casual or part-time work, and they're also making subject selections for the senior secondary years of schooling, which means that if they're not choosing subjects that are going to continue to push their economic and financial capability, this is kind of a key milestone in their financial literacy learning. So here's how the teachers responded as to what they said was important. We also asked the teachers to then tell us the sorts of things that they teach their students. So in this way, we were looking to explore the alignment between what teachers think it means to be financially literate or financially capable, and then how their practice reflects that. So there's probably no surprises here for you, other than the fact that on the right-hand side, these secondary commerce teachers, so working in year 7 to 10 humanities classrooms, are telling us that a lot of their work involves or leans into the mathematics curriculum. So let's take a look at the mathematics curriculum. I've just pulled together the trajectory from year 5 to year 10. Within the number and algebra, money and financial mathematics strand and substrand. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting this to you is today I'm going to make an argument that this is too narrow. So if this is all we are doing in how we are reading and interpreting what's required of us and what is in students' interests in terms of teaching and learning for financial capability, it's not quite enough. Now, in fact, right across the curriculum, if we read and interpret the curriculum as a blueprint, there are very broad and also deep opportunities to go further. And so I would argue that there are many activities that teachers are engaging in within a range of discipline areas where they are actually building financial capability without necessarily intending to or realising it. And what I'm going to argue today is that we can afford to be more explicit here, and I'm going to show you some possibilities for what that would look like in your classrooms. Because what I've been talking about so far is really the traditional intersections. And as someone who comes from a secondary teaching background in economics and business, I've always been really interested in this partnership between the disciplines. It's quite implicit. It's not often that humanities and mathematics teachers are hanging out together in schools and planning curriculum together. But in fact, we are touching on each other's work quite regularly. So in this figure, what I'm arguing is that if we read the economics and business curriculum, and this is around levels 9 to 10, and we read the mathematics curriculum, we see that there's an intersection, and this is the most explicit intersection because it draws on what is flagged as consumer and financial literacy and money and financial mathematics. It's very explicit. But at the intersection, we're also working at building capabilities, and those capabilities are numeracy, critical and creative thinking. But I'm arguing that there's also great potential for teaching ethical capability through financial contexts as well. And this is where we have real potential to imagine a new vision for what it means to be financially capable and a more socially just vision. And in order to do this, mathematics education must play a key role. So I'm going to segue to some stories. The first story is about some research that I undertook very early in my career. And I was interested in 10 to 12-year-old students, so year 5 to 6 students, perceptions around saving money. So have a look at this problem, which I presented to students in an interview setting. Okay, so when I present this problem to adults, usually teachers, their response is, oh, they need to swap cars. Okay, now they're applying their mathematical knowledge and skills. They don't necessarily need to do calculations. There's a familiarity with this context if you're a car owner or, in the situation where you drive some of the way and catch public transport to work. So for adults, this is a very straightforward, almost a yes, so what problem. But when you present this problem to young people, they reveal fascinating insights. And students were telling me things like, they should walk to work, or they should ride a bike, or maybe they could walk part of the way and get a lift with somebody else. And, they had all of these creative solutions. And what those solutions had in common was that they didn't require the use of mathematics. So students didn't necessarily see a need to mathematise this problem. Now, what's interesting is all of those possibilities, some of them did not make sense. If you're driving a total of 100 kilometres each week, that's not a distance that you want to be walking. But what a lot of the responses shared in common was a capacity to save money. And also the understanding that in order to save money, you need to change your behaviour. So that's really interesting. 10 to 12-year-old students coming up with creative ways to save money. So take a look at this conversation with Lara. So Lara did identify that they could swap cars, and she did undertake some mathematical workings to try and convince me that that was a good solution. But interestingly, she was actually adamant that the petrol cost was in the hundreds of dollars per week. Let's take a look at her workings. So as you can see, she knew the procedure and she applied it with precision, but she overlooked the fact that she was working in cents and would need to convert her answer to dollars and cents. So I want to talk about how we can understand what's happened here. This is the OECD PISA model of mathematical modelling. So the students were given a problem in context, and that required them to formulate and strategize how they would use mathematics to solve that problem. And as we saw, Lara had a pretty good go at employing mathematics in a way that was mostly appropriate. But when she arrived at her mathematical results and was required to interpret these, moving from the mathematical world back to the real world, her interpretation was not robust. It did not make sense. And so her ability to bring those mathematical results into context was compromised. Now, this is a cycle. In a classroom situation where students are solving worded problems, we would see them go through the cycle but move back and forth routinely through the stages, and certainly move back and forth between the mathematical world and the real world. And so, this story is just one of many. I had to make selections for such a limited time slot today, but one of many where I have learned that this is where we can help students in making them reason to us in ways that connect the mathematical and the real worlds together. Let's have a look at this conversation with Bruno, which is also about the Frank and Nellie problem. Now, the response to sell the car was not rare. And again, that's really fascinating to me, because these 10 to 12-year-old students, and I knew their socioeconomic background. I had spoken to their parents about what their values were and what they wanted their children to understand about money. But these 10 to 12-year-old students, particularly if they were from low socioeconomic backgrounds, they were able to tell me that you can sell the car. That's an option. That's an option to liquidate an asset if you need cash. And again, that's a really sophisticated understanding, and one that we might not expect students to share with us. So I think this is really interesting, because it gives us an insight as educators that the work that we can be doing is helping students to mathematise the real world more effectively. But also, we want to do so in ways that privilege and respect and are sensitive to what is real for students. Okay, another story. You might have seen these jars. You might have used these jars with your own children. It's a bit of a novel way for splitting pocket money. You have a spending jar, a saving jar, and a giving jar. So again, in interview situations, I ask students to imagine that they've received $100. It's a windfall. What would they do with that $100? They could split it between the three jars in any way they chose. Take a look at this conversation with Cohen. Cohen was a student in an urban Darwin school, low socioeconomic background, challenging school setting, and this is how he responded. So Cohen's mum would leave early in the morning to work at McDonald's. Dad would leave early in the morning to work in construction. He wouldn't see his parents before the school day. Grandma was at home and she was the main caregiver. And you could see the anxiousness around this financial question. And again, this is not this incident, it has not been rare in my research. I have seen students from single parent households, for example, when you present them with this 3 jars problem, you can pretty much rely on the fact that they're going to tell you that they're going to share some money with mum. So the sharing jar, which for some students is seen as an opportunity to donate to a cause, in many families, it's seen as a resource to be shared within the family. So young people are raised through what we call financial timescapes. And we are living in a unique and a heartbreaking financial timescape right now. In Victoria, students have spent significant amounts of time remote learning within their family setting. And under normal circumstances, we know that children are learning about money all of the time within their homes, families, and communities. And that learning involves the development of social and cultural norms around money. It involves perceptions of what the financial reality is and a shaping of values and attitudes through financial experiences and encounters. So that's under normal circumstances, but we're not living under normal circumstances. And so what happens is students bring that informal learning into their formal education. And as teachers, we work with the school curriculum to try and shape and extend their learning further. But right now, we have students living in significant financial hardship that is through no fault of their own. And in fact, hardship and disadvantage is never through the fault of family and children. But what we see right now is that perhaps they have witnessed the shock of unemployment. Perhaps the family's small business has taken a blow. Maybe it's been compromised. Maybe it's had to close altogether. There's been a loss of income. Perhaps there's now a reliance on Centrelink for JobKeeper, JobMaker, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot going on that young people are making sense of. And this presents us with opportunities to connect with what's going on for students and use those experiences to shape quality teaching and learning. But that's quite sophisticated work, and it has to be done in very sensitive ways. We know that students' social and cultural norms influence the way that they mathematise problems. And so our work needs to be around the value and the merit in mathematics as a tool for understanding economics and finance. So traditional financial education programs tend to assume that financial life is an even playing field. There are a lot of one-size-fits-all offerings. Many of them are funded by the finance industry. And they're popular in schools. So, up until right now, and I'm hoping that this moment in time perhaps creates a legacy and a possibility for a reimagining and a new way forward. But up until now, we've tended to focus on those traditional or narrow intersections that I highlighted at the start of the presentation. And why have we done that? Well, we've done that because the finance industry has really controlled the narrative around what it means to be financially literate. And that narrative, they've managed through branding to infiltrate schools and classrooms with that narrative. As we find our COVID normal, more Australian students are living in households characterised by loss and hardship, and also some have been under lockdown conditions where they have witnessed heightened financial abuse because of these additional pressures that we're facing right now. And this is why students, some students can articulate that they find money problems stressful. Internationally, scholars are arguing that there needs to be an ethics of care as a necessary feature of economics, business, and financial education. And this requires us to imagine teaching and learning experiences that are consciousness raising, and perhaps that develop economic and mathematical and ethical reasoning together. Green argues that if we can shift the way we think about economics and finance, then we can perhaps nurture ethical bearings that will help us to find more equitable and sustainable solutions to the sorts of social and ecological problems that humanity is confronting. And again, I've made some selections for today's presentation to get you thinking about what that might look like. My argument is, again, that mathematics has a really central role to play. Okay, let's talk about financial innovation. Research is showing that young people distrust banks, and it's easy to understand why. For some time in schools, we've been teaching students about credit cards, and often that teaching is quite values laden, and it promotes the idea that credit cards are bad and should be avoided. Okay, now that messaging is quite different to teaching students how credit cards work and how to use them in a way that that works for you. Okay, so we've also had the Royal Commission into Banking, which highlighted a deeply problematic finance industry that can really no longer be trusted. And that kind of tells us that we need to be teaching in ways that are critical and that help students to be critical, not just of the finance industry, but of other organisations that they're interacting with as well. So while this has all been going on, we've had financial innovation, and we have buy now, pay later services. And Afterpay is one example. You may or may not have used it yourself. But this is a grab from the Afterpay website. And they want us to know that it's always interest-free. And good things come to those who afterpay. Now, what's wrong with this? Well, Consumer Group Choice argues that these buy now, pay later services entice customers to make impulse purchases and satisfy a desire for instant gratification. 60% of buy now, pay later users are young, so they're aged 18 to 34. This is quite interesting. 40% earn under $40,000 per year, and 40% are students or work part-time. Most report that buy now, pay later enables them to buy more expensive items and to spend more. 65% perceived missing a buy now, pay later payment to be less risky than other payment options. And more than 15% had either incurred late fees or borrowed more money because of a buy now, pay later debt. So this data helps us to understand that young people are not really well informed about how to use buy now, pay later. Now, it's kind of unsurprising to me because it's a financial innovation. We're perhaps not teaching about this particular financial context in schools. These 18 to 34-year-olds have been out of school for some time since Afterpay and what have you have become more popular. And so what is it that we need to be teaching students then if we're not quite sure what the financial innovations of tomorrow will bring, but we want students to learn to be critical of those financial innovations. So let's have a look at the fine print. If you use Afterpay and you make every payment on time, you will pay no fees. If you miss a payment, you're charged a $10 fee and you're not able to use Afterpay until the payments are up to date. If you don't have enough money on your debit or credit card to cover that automatic payment and your payment is declined, then you have 24 hours to log into your account and pay the amount before you are charged a $10 late fee. For orders below $40, a maximum of one $10 late fee can be applied per order. Now, this is a recent development in the fee structure, so I just want to flag that with you. For orders of $40 or more, a further $7 late fee will be charged if the payment remains unpaid 7 days after the due date. And the total of the late fees is capped at either 25% of the original purchase amount or $68, whichever is less. Now, you might want to take a photo or a screenshot of that. You will get these slides after, but I'm going to ask you to do some tasks with that information. So I'll give you a sec to just take a screenshot or a photo. Okay. And just to let you know, you can access these tasks in the latest issue of Vinculum and also under the resources page associated with this presentation. I've uploaded it there for you to access. So let's take a look at how Jane uses Afterpay. Now, what about Saxon? So this task involving Saxon is an interesting one, right? Because we often teach students to calculate the percentage of one figure in relation to another, but not always in a context that is useful. So when we go to the Afterpay website and we see always interest free, sounds good, right? Because, you know, we know that one of the perils of credit cards is interest. So if this is interest free, it's got to be a good idea, right? But in fact, if you're paying late fees, it's like paying interest. That purchase is costing you more. And this is what we're trying to get students to understand. Now have a think about, if you've looked at task 1 and task 2, what about Jamal? Jamal's just thinking about it. What sort of advice should we give him? What does he need to know? And how would you use mathematics to explain your thinking? Now, this is the crux of it, right? This is what we actually want to prepare students to do, because in an ideal world, there'll be something new tomorrow that we won't necessarily have studied, but we want students to be able to, or to be motivated to and able to read terms and conditions, take a look at fee structures, do some mathematics to understand what the implications of the fees are, and align their behaviour with the fee structure and their mathematical understandings in ways that are healthy. So you can see that this series of tasks draws very strongly on the proficiencies. And in fact, if you do access that article in Vinculum, we've put together a greater range of information that we suggest that you give to students, and embed the language and literacy demands within the mathematics lesson, because reading and interpreting mathematical information within written statements is a critical financial capability. Okay, so on the left hand, I'm presenting this to you as a dichotomy. On the left-hand side, I'm saying that there are things that we need to teach students to do if they are to participate. And making sense of the fee structure for buy now, pay later is one example. It enables them to participate in productive ways. But at the other end, if we prepare them to be critical, then we would prepare them to critique the ethics and the regulation of buy now, pay later services. So we'd actually expose them to that research that ASIC has undertaken that looks at who's using buy now, pay later and whether doing so is really in their interests. And this is where we have the opportunity to teach for social justice, getting young people oriented to being skeptical and being critical of the world in which they live. And that skepticism and criticality can drive more informed decision making. Now, I'm going to convince you of that with some more examples. I'm going to initiate a simple predict, observe, explain. Now, this is a provocation. Our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, recently said that if you're good at your job, you'll get a job. That's how it works. Now, I'm curious to know, is this statement accurate? Or might unemployment be higher among some Australians than others? What I'm going to do next is show you some data. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to give you a few moments on each slide. As you look at each slide, I want you to just make some notes for yourself around this provocation. What do you notice? And what do you wonder about? And those wonderings will perhaps drive some questions related to this provocation. Okay, so what did you notice and what do you wonder about? And I'm wondering if you can use data and evidence to support your claims and questions. Now, I'm not going to open up for discussion right now, but I'm hoping I've got you thinking about how this might work with students, because there are some things that can fall out of this type of predict, observe, explain activity. The first thing is that when we ask students to make predictions, we are tapping into the knowledge, the funds of knowledge that exist because of home, family, and community learning. So we're giving them an opportunity to voice what it is they've observed and experienced in the world beyond school. Okay, so that's a really neat pedagogical strategy for bringing students right into the experience and giving them something to say. The first graph highlights that things are challenging for young people. So that's worthy of exploration. The second graph highlights that things are challenging for women. And I rarely find that teachers are saying to me, oh yeah, we do a great job of teaching our girls about structural inequality. You know, like we're just not talking with female students and male students about this. And the third graph might promote some questions that what is it about the nature of work that women are doing compared to the nature of work that men are doing that means that they were more likely to become unemployed. And so this kind of leads us into understanding why it's been called the pink recession. So this uses mathematics to promote interesting understandings about the world that students are going to graduate into. Let's take a look at another provocation. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews, during the pandemic, highlighted that precarious work was a substantial driver of Victoria's second wave. And he promised that action on insecure work would be a feature of Victoria's economic recovery. And in fact, he has followed through with the state budget recently released, where he's continued to push this message, and he's actually referred to casualised work as toxic. Is there any evidence to support the Premier's claims? Now, I've got links to two articles that I've chosen. My colleague Jill is popping them in the chat so that you can copy and paste them into a browser and have a quick look through. Just choose one. And what I would like you to do is look for some evidence, mathematical evidence that could be used to support the Premier's claim. And what I want you to do is pull out a piece of evidence and then write down one or two sentences that develops an argument. So makes a claim and develops an argument about that evidence. I'll give you a couple of minutes. So again, this type of activity requires students to read and interpret mathematical information. And this is an increasingly important skill because we have so much access to information. The information is not always from a reliable source. Students are taking grabs from social media and believing those grabs to be true. So developing a criticality around written information presented by politicians and presented in the media is critically important. I want to highlight that I've chosen articles by the Conversation and ABC here. Often through those publications, you can find articles that present opposing viewpoints, particularly with the Conversation. So you can show students two sides of an argument, but with expert commentary around that. And you probably appreciate why I'm not suggesting Murdoch Press at this point in time. And, that's something that we could do a separate type of analysis around. So here's what I pulled out of these articles, just 3 things across the 2 articles. And I would get students working in groups to do this. So finding the data and evidence is one thing. Students are highlighting what they've learned. But on the right-hand side, this is their claims and arguments. So this is where they're bringing reasoning to what it is that they're reading in order to build an argument. And so from there, we can go back to the provocation and say, well, what do we think of this assertion by Daniel Andrews? You can see here there are more sophisticated intersections in these sorts of activities. Again, we're still bringing together economics and business on the left-hand side and mathematics on the right-hand side, but would you think to be developing economics and financial capability when you're looking at statistics and probability? Now, I'm assuming that often you do. And so while it's not explicitly flagged in the curriculum as a teachable moment for economics and finance, it's likely that this sort of work is already being done in classrooms, but also likely that we could be doing more of it. The intersections with the capabilities are still the same, and you can see here that the intersections with the ethical capability and the critical and creative thinking capability are elevated within tasks like this. And so there's transfer of learning, because my argument is that if you can do these sorts of activities, then there's other really useful things that you can do, like make sense of your utilities bill, make sense of your superannuation statement, make sense of political and economic issues, but also distinguish between fact and opinion, and develop skepticism and resilience to fake news and scams, and make informed, evidence-based decisions. So that transferability of learning is really important. And it's the practice with different contexts that builds the capacity to transfer the learning of knowledge, skills, and capabilities into a broader range of real-world financial contexts. Okay, if you are looking for more, colleagues and I have been writing around the crisis this year. So together with my colleagues Simone Smood and Ailey Davidson, we wrote an article about using financial modelling to decide whether or not to tap into your superannuation. Again, I've got this one uploaded under the resources for you, so you could take that into Year 9 and 10 classrooms. The writing there reflects a lot of the thinking about valuing and respecting what students bring to the classroom in terms of their experiences and observations with money, but also the pedagogies that I've tried to highlight for you today. Young people get a hard time in the media, and a lot has been said about, why are young people accessing their superannuation for a housing deposit? Well, why are they? That's something worth exploring and being critical about. And so I offer you that article to get you thinking there. Another one that we've got in press, it will be published in the next week or so, and when it is, I'll add it to the resources for you, is this, the blue task on the left-hand side is for upper primary students, and it's using mathematics to explore social entrepreneurship. And that draws on some of the businesses that have been offering, that have shifted their model of operation in order to help feed people that are facing food insecurity at the moment. And, sadly, we're seeing more and more families in need of reaching out for support with food and meals. So this article explores a mathematical task that looks at the business angle of that. I also want to flag with you that in the recent notice to schools, VCAR is seeking feedback on a review of the VCE Foundation Mathematics, Units 1 to 4, where it's proposed there be increased opportunities for teaching and learning financial and consumer mathematics. So if you are particularly interested, whether or not you're teaching VCE, you can access that paper that's now open for consultation, and I encourage you to please complete the questionnaire and let the review panel know what you think of that curriculum development. I am here to help, so I would really like to hear from you with your feedback on the session. I'm going to open to questions in a moment, but if after the session you feel moved to email me, I would be really happy to hear from you and continue the conversation. My colleague Jill has been monitoring the chat, so she's going to let me know some of your top questions.
Hey, Carly, thanks. Yeah, there's some interesting conversations there, but I note that one person's written humanities ? So I wonder if you could elaborate a bit about what's maths and what's humanities.
Okay, so this is in the sense of the way that the curriculum is organised into learning areas, and there is the humanities and social sciences curriculum learning area, and that is broken up into history, geography, civics and citizenship, and economics and business. Now that organising of the curriculum is often reflected in the organising of school timetabling and the allocation of staffing. So what I'm saying is that students will often attend a humanities class, and sometimes in year 7 to 10, they might not have exposure to economics and business unless they've elected to study an economics and business style subject. This varies from school to school. And, if that's the case, if they're not electing into those learning areas, then, we're relying even more strongly on the teaching of economics and finance within mathematics classrooms.
So you're saying everything that you've presented today is something we should be addressing in mathematics?
I'm saying that we should be making more explicit the intersections, and this is one example of where there are productive intersections, but there are likely to be others. It may well be that your school has a robust curriculum for health education, for example. And so that might be something that would be strengthened through explicit connection with the mathematics curriculum to kind of, I guess, expose and exploit those intersections.
Thanks. There's a great question here from Jenny about, can you talk a little more about teaching statistics with financial capabilities? I have some teachers I work with saying it can't be done.
I think the starting point is to, identify what learning you're looking to achieve, and then work together with your colleagues to think about what are the contexts where this learning can really be exposed. Now, issues like, I'll go back to workforce, because I think there's so much that we can be exploring about the world of work with students, and the use of statistics is, if you were to say to students, women get a raw deal in the workforce, right? If you're going to be provocative and put something like that to them, that's unlikely to educate the broader group of students, right? In fact, that's going to turn some students off. But if you're to present the data and the statistics that highlights that for the same work, women are underpaid. Women also tend to be employed in roles, in particular roles where the pay is less. And this contributes to a gender pay gap that actually pushes into retirement, because there's an influence on superannuation savings, and then present data that we're now seeing that women are at risk of homelessness in their older years. You're putting together a complete picture that's based on data and statistics that is potent provocation for reasoning, so for teaching why these statistics should be collected and reported, the mathematics that underpins them, and then what the implications are in terms of the broader social good.
There's some nice positive feedback from a few different people talking about we obviously need to definitely rethink what we're doing at year 10 and rethink about going well beyond just a focus on simple and compound interest. I guess they're saying we shouldn't just be limited by the literal comments, outcomes in the curriculum we've got. Accessing raw data for use in statistical analysis is far more challenging than you'd expect.
Yeah.
Do you have any resources you can recommend?
Yeah. So what I'll do is, because I think I'll get a record of this chat. So if you're interested in particular resources, it would be great if you could email me, and then I can reply to you directly and point you in the direction of what's good. There's some really interesting. So in that edition of Australian Mathematics Education Journal that our article about superannuation is published in, there was a great article about the statistics that underpin the pandemic, and so again, an activity like that has transferable learning outcomes. But by all means, email me to be pointed in the right direction of things that are going to help you.
And Norhana saying, yes, the Australian Bureau of Statistics is a great source for raw data. And of course, if we're using technological devices, then lots of data is quite manageable.
Yeah.
And Samantha's going to email you, I think.
Okay, cool.
So the resources and the recording will be available for a year as I read the chat, which is a bit challenging,
that's right.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of thank yous. It definitely sounds like you've made people think about what we should be doing in financial literacy.
That's great to hear. Thank you. I mean, I'm excited by the possibility for change, and I think I'm hearing lots of positive news that certainly the Victorian Department of Education are looking to shake things up. So I'm interested in what shake things up is going to look like, and yeah, but I'm also looking at what some young people are experiencing within their families and communities at the moment, and feeling that the need for sensitivity is great.
Yeah. An ABS website not overly user-friendly. That's true. I think the OECD website's got some interesting data
I was
too,
just going to
including
say, like,
financial literacy.
Yeah, the OECD downloads. I mean, I think if you're taking from a large scale data source like that, you might need to adapt, take a segment of the data that's of interest to you and put it in a format that's going to be that students are going to be able to contend with in the first instance. Yeah, it's kind of like, on the one hand, you might start by asking them to collect data, but on the other hand, you want them to move to working with more sophisticated data sets through the later years in secondary school as well. And I think there's certainly benefit in doing that.
Yeah, taking a sensible sample of the data too will be helpful. Yes, and I think there's a few participants in this session are going to get together with the colleagues out of mathematics and start to think about what they can do.
Fantastic.
Business management teachers and so on.
That'd be great. If you do that and you're interested in some facilitation, like a thought provoker like today, please do get in contact with me. I love the idea of colleagues working together across the disciplines to really expose and exploit those intersections, I think. And I presented to commerce teachers last week a similar way of thinking, and some of them were inspired. So hopefully you can find each other.
Yeah, and Chris is pointing out that we don't want to alienate the boys, which is a good point, but to make sure that impacts.
It's an outstanding point because, the reality is that the boys are likely to be the ones that are going to be making decisions that will see this change. And so, there has been great social and generational change that has been happening. We now see parental leave equally available to men as to women. And so these are social phenomena and trends that warrant study as well. There's media articles that look at the changing nature of the workplace, that the new hybrid workplace, because men have had experiences through the pandemic that they have enjoyed. Reducing their commute and spending more time with their families. And so, though data around that is really worth exploring too.
There's another very good question here, which I've just lost in the little skinny chat, about, do you think teaching financial maths should be different to students of different social and economic backgrounds? Which I think ties in nicely with the question about the gender.
Yeah, I think we need, and this is where mathematics provides the possibilities, right? Because the teaching looks and feels quite different if you let the data do the talking and if you let students bring their own noticings and wonderings and perspectives to that data. I think that this notion of an ethics of care helps us to perhaps become oriented to teaching in a way that is not focused on wealth accumulation, which often in the past financial education programs have been focused on this idea of making decisions to accumulate wealth. We can challenge that, and we can also expose the idea that people's financial circumstances can vary so greatly, even within a classroom, and that's where the development of ethical principles and empathy lies. I
think you've covered everything. Just you'll expect a few emails from a range of people in a range of schools.
Yeah, great.
And thanking you for the inspiring presentation, making them rethink about what they're doing in financial maths. So that's fantastic. Well done.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Jill, for being here as an an ever supportive colleague. Jill was co-author on the Vinculum piece about Buy Now, Pay Later. I didn't mention that earlier. So yeah, again, thanks everyone for being here. I hope that the remainder of the day is also useful to you, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Carly, for that insightful and very, very relevant keynote presentation. And thank you, Jill, for your assistance and support. On behalf of MAV, I'd like to thank you both for your time today. And just a note for MAV members, you can access the Vinculum journal Carly referred to on the MAV website in case you can't find your hard copy. Okay, so we will now take a quick break. Don't forget to check out the virtual delegate satchel and to touch base with our sponsors and exhibitors. The next session will commence at 10:25 a.m. See you then.